Plants can be a great addition to the overall filtration of a pond. In this video, I'd like to talk about the best plants for water filtration, some of my personal favourites, how you should plant your pond plants, and how to save money growing your own. If you don't already know me, my name is Kev, and the aim of my channel is to help people build and maintain ponds without spending a fortune. If that sounds like something that interests you, you might like to subscribe and visit my website, Ozponds.com. So when it comes to plants that help the most with filtering the water, it's the plants in the riparian zone. That's just a fancy way of saying the plants that grow on the margins of aquatic environments. One of the reasons these plants are the most effective as filters is that they have their roots inside the water, but the majority of the foliage is outside the water. The root systems spread out into the substrate and consume nutrients stored in the substrate, and also they'll send out roots into the water and they'll consume nutrient from the water itself. The roots that penetrate into the substrate will provide oxygen, which helps oxygen-loving bacteria work their magic, even when the flow of water isn't great through these areas. For anyone that regularly listens to me ramble on, knows how much I love bog filters and how they recreate wetland or bog conditions in nature. The riparian plantings inside the bog are a great complement to the work of the bacteria inside the filter. The plants will also help capture sediments, which reduces overall maintenance. Submerged plants can also be useful. They'll produce oxygen during the day and absorb nutrients, but probably their main benefit is that they just increase the surface area inside the pond. Nitrogen processing bacteria need wet surfaces to grow on, and they're the backbone of a pond's filtration system. So plants are always a great addition because they'll increase the wet surface area and therefore increase the potential habitat for good bacteria. Floating plants are also great as they can extract their nutrients directly from the water column. They'll help create shade, which also helps keep the water cooler. This is useful as cooler water holds on to more oxygen, and oxygen is vital to everything living inside the pond. Many floating plants can grow quickly if there's too much nutrient. Therefore, they can give you a good idea as how much nutrient the pond is producing. If you want an easy to maintain pond, you want a low nutrient pond. Anyway, for me the plants I lean most heavily on are the riparian or marginal plants. The fact that the majority of the foliage is outside the water makes them easier to maintain even when it's cold. Remember, any foliage that we trim off or pull out and dispose of is effectively the removal of the nutrient that it took for the plant to grow. Submerged plants can be difficult to remove if you don't want to get wet. I also find they have a tendency to trap sediments inside the main pond area. I much prefer to have the sediments settle out, or if I can remove them, or make their way over to the filters, where again I can remove them. In small ponds like this wine barrel, I'm quite happy to be loaded up with submerged plants because it's very easy for me to reach in and thin out from time to time. Floating plants are great as long as they don't take over the pond and they aren't decomposing inside the water. Because if they decompose inside the pond, that nutrient is just being re-released and we want to try and remove it. So that's sort of what benefits and downsides of the three main aquatic plant zones, with submerged, floating and marginal. The more diverse each zone, the more robust the ecosystem. So now I'll list some of my personal favourites. Keep in mind that what works for me might not work for you. We all live in different countries and climate zones. So for a bit of height on the margins, I like rushes. There's tons of different varieties, but I really love these tassel cord rushes, and I use them throughout my larger ponds, streams and bog filters. You can propagate most rushes by seed, but I mostly just divide them. The seed takes too long. With most pond plants, you can very easily divide them or take cuttings. I'm always surprised at the prices being charged for aquatic plants, because they're so incredibly easy to grow. For a bit of height in the shaded areas, I like to use different ferns. Maidenhair ferns and rabbitfoot ferns do well for me. Larger ponds, bogs and streams can have tree ferns. I've had quite a few ferns just seed organically. I just let them grow and see what happens. For small to medium plants on the margins, I like dwarf sweet flag. I find it does better in the shade than in full sun. It's a quick grower and it's really easy to divide. I also like milfoil. I have two types I use a lot of, the upright version and the red stem version. Both grow really quick and stick to the margins. They don't seem to venture out into the deeper water. I like the soft foliage and it grows quite thick and makes a great hiding place for baby fish. You can easily propagate it just by cutting, rip a piece off and just bury it in another location. This is probably a good time to mention that all my plants are planted directly into the pebble of the pond, no soil. The only plants I have in soil are the water lilies, but even these have since spread beyond their pots and are consuming nutrients from the substrate. Another medium plant for the shade that I like are impatiens. They're so easy and they look so good. Where I live they die off in the winter and I need to buy more in spring. Once you get a few going, you can take cuttings of them just like the milfoil, rip a piece off and stick it in some wet gravel. For ground covers on the margins, my go-to is bacopa. It just spreads everywhere. I find it easy to pull up, which makes it perfect for that nutrient removal I was talking about earlier. Like the milfoil, it won't really venture out into the deep water. It's a great sediment trap and it does a great job hiding the liner and naturalising the edges. For a really small ground cover in the shade, I like baby tears. I don't use a lot of floating plants, especially in the larger ponds. But I do use a lot of water fringe. It's like a water lily, but it sends out runners. It can take over, but luckily the runners pull up pretty easy, and the runners can be used to create new plants. In the smaller ponds for floaters, I like duckweed and azolla. For submerged plants in the smaller ponds, I like Ludwigia, Rotala, eelgrass and hornwort. The eelgrass will run and can be divided, whereas the others can be multiplied via cuttings. Algae is also something that I don't mind in my ponds and streams, as long as it doesn't take over. It's natural and it's great at consuming nutrients and helping break down organic materials like sticks and leaves that fall into the pond. I also like to encourage moss and lichens. These are all part of robust ecosystems in nature, so we should allow them in our ponds. Having lots of diversity makes it hard for any one plant, bacteria, algae or lichen to completely take over. Anyway, those are pretty much my personal go-to plants. I hope this was helpful. If it was, go ahead and give the thumbs up button a tickle for me. Thanks for watching. See ya.